minute or two after 4 o'clock on Tuesday, November the 15th, 2016. This is the meeting of the Tallahassee Ethics Board. I'll call the meeting to order. Our first order of business is approval of the minutes from our last meeting on October the 18th. Does anyone have any comments or corrections on the minutes, or would someone like to move approval of the minutes?
I'll move the minutes for the last meeting be approved.
All right, I have a motion
Second.
and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. The minutes are approved. The next item is the Ethics Officer Report, which, as you will see on your agenda, contains a number of items, and I'll recognize Ms. Meadows-Keefe just to go through them in the order that they are on our agenda.
I think Mr. Poitevant's indicating he can't hear you, Mr. Chair, so you need to pull right up to that mic. Am I correct? Okay.
Will do. I will talk into the microphone. We are on item 3 on our agenda, and Ms. Meadows-Keefe is recognized.
And Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'm going to just share with the group that I think Mr. Ojatayo has officially called into the meeting. Am I right, Mr. Lutz? Okay,
That is correct.
All right. Hi, Mr. Ojatayo. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can, very clearly. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Please continue.
All right, so I am providing my report for the month as usual, and you'll see noted on there the various activities that I have undertaken. One thing of note is there have been several occasions where I've met with city staff to implement some recommendations made by Ms. Phillips, and I'm working with HR to have human resources, to have some language incorporated into the human resource policies and procedures that reference our board and our authority and expectations for employees. Likewise, there are actions being taken through the procurement department, disclosure forms for folks that evaluate the awarding of contracts, etc. And as usual, I have attended some forums, one on the local economy and other commission workshops. The commission reconvenes on Monday next week when the incoming commissioners will get sworn in. Let's see, I also have my report of tracking materials, the calls and inquiries that have come in. I distributed, hopefully y'all got it at your place, number 85. There was a report of a dangerous, aggressive driver. That case got resolved. The driver was located and counseled, and again, that was closed because it's not a violation of our city ethics code. There is the monthly budget, and then the campaign contribution refund monthly report.
Excuse me, let me interrupt for 1 second before you go on. The budget is on a separate page. I see
Correct.
lines, it's spreadsheet lines
Yes.
1 through 34. Just to, so we don't pass over that too quickly, is there anything on there that's different from the past, any unusual expenditure, or is this just routine?
These are routine.
Okay. Does anybody have
Expenses.
any questions related to the budget?
No.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Ms. Meadows-Keefe. I just wanted to take an extra minute on that particular item. You're on campaign contributions.
Yes, and we did get 3 of those for the month. Those have been paid. As you know, we are closing out acceptance of the applications for the refund at the end of January. So folks do have several more opportunities to submit that documentation and receive the refund. I would also like to shout out This is included in your materials. There was a mailer very courteously done with League of Women Voters and Citizens for Ethics Reform, and forgive me if I leave anyone out, but this was actually a nice color mailer that was done and was sent actually to voters that were qualified for the refund in an attempt to get them to fill the paperwork out and get it back. I'm not sure how to measure the success of that mailer, but I appreciate the extra assistance in getting the word out about that. The next item included in my report is that each year the city issues annual reminders for critical policy requirements. These are requirements and policies that are required to be posted in all the work areas and spaces, and supervisors and managers are to remind staff of various policies, and this includes our ethics statement. So I wanted to go ahead and bring that to your attention, that this is always included as a critical policy. And the next item, and I am going to do this as part of my report, but I'm skipping over right now the list of investigators. I'm going instead to another item that deals with our meeting schedule. Mr. Chair, when do you want to talk about the potential alteration of the meeting schedule for those 3 months? Because I have that right in front of me now.
Why don't you go ahead? This will be for next year. We have, as I understand, a conflict with the room, and Ms. Meadows-Keefe has been trying to roundtable negotiate something for us.
Correct. And my wonderful assistant, Lucy's been helping with this. We have next year 3 meetings, our February 21st meeting, our June 20th meeting, and our September 19th meeting, again in 2017, where the intergovernmental, it's the Blueprint Group. They are going to be meeting in here. I tried to stonewall them, but they're elected officials and other people that need this room. So we are going to have to make some kind of alteration. So the choices that the board has, and so I want to introduce this item. You can look at calendars and perhaps we can make a final decision in December, that we can either move the meeting on those dates. We'll keep the meeting on the 3rd Tuesday of each month, but we will meet from 11 to 2, and we would meet here in the chamber. So that's option 1, that we move the meeting earlier in the day on those 3 dates, 11 to 2. The next option is that we can meet in the Florida room on the same day, and the downfall to that would be that we would not be recording that meeting and broadcasting it, because in order to broadcast the meeting, it has to be here, because this is where all of the equipment is. So we've been committed to transparency in broadcasting the meetings, so we could just simply have the meeting at the same time, just in a room where we would not be able to broadcast. And if you were here at the beginning of the board, you'll remember we used to meet in those rooms. So the
Ms. Meadows-Keefe,
Yeah.
just a very quick question on that. If we were to meet in that room, could we get an audio recording that we could put on the website?
Oh, absolutely.
We wouldn't have video.
We would not have video, and
We wouldn't have the contemporaneous broadcast.
right, and we probably wouldn't have the audio quality that we have now too. So, you know, those are the options. Or we could move the meeting to another day, and we could have it on Thursdays from 4 to 7 in the chamber, if we wanted to do Thursdays. So think about that, I guess, in light of your calendars, and be prepared maybe at the next meeting, Mr. Chair.
Let me just ask if anybody has any questions or comments on any of those.
I'll give
or
you a
has another
comment.
option.
I'm not comfortable with the second option.
Okay.
Anything that lessens the ability of the public to know what we're doing, in my opinion, is not good.
Okay.
I would, first option, third option, I can live with, but I'm not happy with that second one.
Okay. Anyone else? Thank you, because
Yeah.
it's in my view, anytime you can take an option off the table, you're moving forward.
Okay.
But, okay, so this will be on our agenda formally for December, if y'all would be prepared to make a decision. So tell us the Tuesday dates again. It was
Okay.
February 21st?
Well, yeah, we're still meeting the third Tuesday of every month, and so it'd be the February meeting, which is on the 21st, the June meeting, which is on the 20th, and the September meeting, which is on the 19th.
So option 3 would be in those months, we would push the date back so that February 21st would become February 23rd, June 20th.
Well, one option was that we just meet early on those days.
On the third option.
The third option,
Changing the date.
yep,
Each of the February 21st to become February 23rd, June 20th becomes
Correct.
June 22nd.
Correct.
That's what you're proposing for option 3.
That
So
is.
as people check calendars, that's
May I
what
have the
we'd be
dates
checking.
again, please?
February 21,
Right,
June 20, and September 19.
thank you.
So option 3 would push each of those back by 2 days. And if anybody in the audience has any particular brainstorm on that, what I might do is ask you to get with Ms. Meadows-Keefe in the interim, and we'll make sure that we get that in our December discussion, if that's fair.
I do have one question, and that is, querying the other members of the board, does having it earlier in the day mess up your work schedules?
she's nodding no. Not mine.
No?
The
Okay.
time work,
I'm just wondering
a
if
long lunch. is
having it
nothing
early, messes up anybody's work schedule. I'm retired, so for me, it doesn't matter, but
I think the public had a problem with it.
that may be, yeah.
Okay, so we will come back at that. Primarily, what we'll be looking at is on the 3 scheduled Tuesdays, meeting from 11 to 2, or the alternative is to continue to meet at the same time and the same hours and same place, but 2 days later, and moving to Thursday instead of Tuesday.
Okay.
Okay.
All right,
And then
Mr.
we're going
Chair.
to jump back to your investigators.
Yes, correct. And I will say I advocated really hard for us to stay here on our scheduled date, but I had to be nice. The next piece was I was to follow up on investigators that this board may utilize in the event there was a matter that needed in-depth investigation. And during a meeting with Ms. Phillips and procurement folks, they did suggest that the city had investigators that it kept on retainer. So I was asked to take a look at those on that list to perhaps save time for this board in being able to get investigators. So I took a look at the names of those companies, and they are there on that spreadsheet. I went and reviewed the websites of those companies, and my determination was they are primarily insurance defense related investigator firms that insurance companies hire for lawsuits, and they did not seem suited to what it is this board needed. So I consulted with my committee of one, Mr. Friedman. I had on my own determined that I thought a licensed public or private investigator was what we needed, and needed someone local. There were not local people necessarily here on this list. So I found a few and just ran them by him, and I'll let him, with your permission, Mr. Chair, talk.
Friedman, you're recognized to comment.
Okay, well, there's one thing of which I was not aware when I queried these folks, and that was that I've been advised that if they represent the board on these, they cannot do work for the city.
Right.
Conflict of interest. So obviously, I will have to recanvass everyone I spoke to. The first one I called, they are not active today in Tallahassee anymore. They're just not. The second one I called, the gentleman had excellent qualifications as far as I was concerned. He worked in the personal injury area, and his stuff stands up in court, which I think is what we're really looking for, someone who's testified a lot. I wanted to make sure we didn't get someone whose firm just did surveillances or record checks, A lot of firms just do those things, and frankly, they are not competent to go out and conduct investigations. So this third guy certainly had, from the civilian side, had a lot of experience and has handled a number of high-profile cases where if he'd messed up, it would have been embarrassment to clients and firms. So he was fine, in my opinion, not having come from the criminal side. The next one I talked to was a retired detective who had worked as an internal affairs officer in another police department outside of Tallahassee. I thought he was eminently qualified. Again, will they be willing to work for us and not for the city? I don't know. I have to go back and query them. Another one that I had talked to, I'm not aware that he does anything for the city. His background is federal law enforcement, and I think he'd be fine. I went through the listing as far as I could make it in about an hour of trying to pull down the C licenses, which is what we're talking about statewide, folks who hold that license to investigate. Took me over an hour, and I think our ethics officer will agree with this. Slowest website I've encountered ever in my life. I made it to ours, but I don't think, I don't know whether there's anyone past that, because at that point it told me I'd done everything, and I'm saying, well, what about the rest of the letters? It's got to be people who have S's, T's, and W's in their name. I'll try again some other time. What I wound up with was a list of probably about 70 individuals. I would like to, given a choice, extend what I've looked at a little further, make some more calls, and assure myself that, we have enough people to do it. I think we discussed that we'd like to have 4 or 5 on call, because in a number of the cases they said, we'd be happy to do work for you, but we're so busy, this wouldn't be a constant stream of work, would it? And I said, no, it would be very occasional. Oh, that we can do. So I think we're going to need at least 4 or 5 who are willing to do this with us. The other thing I think I need, once I make a call back to each of these people and let them know they can't do the city work and also do this, I may get a turn down or 2, of course. I'll go back into the list, try to pull the rest of the state's list, which may take a while. And once I have, I would like to have 7 or 8 people we could interview. I would also like to have the paperwork on hand for whatever type of retainer that we do, so that if we get somebody good, we kind of ink them the day we interview them and cut the process down in time. Because if we have to go back to people again and again, sometimes you lose them just because they just don't want to be involved with a lot of process. If we can cut the process to where we meet with them, we just step out for a minute, we talk a little bit about them, and then hire them, that would be the best of all worlds to me. Does anybody have any comments about that? And I know I'm a search committee. I don't know if I'm the interview committee, so I need to know that one way or another.
I think the board's going to have to make the final decision, but I think one of the things we need to discuss is whether what we're looking to hire someone with like some kind of initial retainer, or whether we are looking to simply have a list of people who have indicated a willingness, if and when we have the work, that we could call them at that point. Mm-hmm. So it's the kind of what money and when does money change hands? That would be one thing.
We need to know what kind of paperwork we have to sign, though, even if they're just on the list. That we have to have some agreement with them, and they have to, of course, have the job description and know what it is that we expect and what they're not able to do.
Right. Yeah. Let me do this. Let me task Ms. Meadows-Keefe to work with the city in terms of, let's follow their normal procurement processes for things like this, where they have a list of approved vendors, I guess you'd call it, and come back and tell us kind of at the next meeting how that works, how they do that.
May I add one thing? We need to know whether we need to advertise for this, too.
Right. And one of the things we might end up doing is, I know that in the state, a lot of times we would do a request for information, basically saying we might conceivably need these things. Anybody who thinks they can provide these kinds of services, let us know what you can do and when you could do it. And then we knew they were out there.
Okay.
And so instead of having a slow website from which you had to call names, we had a file folder with our 10 or 12 or 4, however many and I think that's what we're all looking for, is sort of a, if we get an investigative situation, we may need to move very quickly when we won't have time to go through an interview process.
I think that, well, that's my concern. If something was to come up tomorrow, right now, we are not equipped without going through some sort of gymnastics to have someone do an investigation for us. And I don't think it's fair to throw that on the ethics officer. She's got other things to do.
Right.
And she should be, in a position where if someone's investigating, she should be able to have some sort of oversight
Well,
rather than actually being involved in doing the investigation.
Right. Let's do this as the next step. If Ms. Meadows-Keefe will come back to us in December and tell us what the city process is for kind of pre-approving vendors. And then, Mr. Friedman, I think at that point, we'll decide whether we're going to issue some kind of a proposal, put out some kind of an ad, or simply cut you loose with a slow website and a cell phone to work it out for us. We'll figure that out
It matters not to me
next.
as long as we do it the right way.
It's the Department of Agriculture website, too. I don't want anyone to think we're talking about the city. But they're the ones that license investigators, so their website is arduous to navigate.
Okay, so.
You're kinder than me.
Okay, we know where we are on that. We'll come back next month and hopefully make a final decision about the process. And then I would hope that by early in 2017, we would be able to lock down our list in whatever form or fashion.
Can I make one last remark? I want to thank our ethics officer for the superb help she gave me in getting started on this. Thank you.
And thank you back.
And is that the end of your report?
That is.
Okay, I want to piggyback on this, and it's not exactly on the agenda, but it kind of fits with your report. At our last meeting, Dr. Hollifield did a presentation about TMH, and I promised him that I would take a serious look at his presentation, not in terms of whether I found things that I personally found offensive or found things that I thought may have been done wrong in the past or being done wrong in the present, but whether he had alleged things in the document that he handed us that would fall within the jurisdiction of the board. So I'm going to now be kind of a committee of one, and I want to tell you what I looked at. In going through his document in detail, there were 5 points, 5 of his allegations that jumped out at me as kind of potentially falling within in the broadest sense, some kind of an ethics complaint. The first one was a possible conflict of interest when a member or members of the board of directors are executives in companies that are awarded contracts by TMH. That could conceivably come under broadly an ethics code. The city ethics ordinance gives the ethics officer the authority to investigate and address complaints related to ethics concerning city officials, appointed officials, vendors, staff, etc. But the ordinance doesn't explicitly extend the board's jurisdiction to addressing those activities of the ethics officer. So that relate broadly to complaints concerning ethics. So while I think conflict of interest certainly is in a lot of ethics codes, I don't think that our ethics ordinance in terms of our jurisdiction extends this board's jurisdiction to that, although different people might argue that differently. The second issue identified in his document was the ongoing $1 a year lease for land and buildings that are worth far more than $1 a year. And that involved going back and looking at the lease, and I think maybe Ms. Phillips has also reviewed the lease. I think you, okay. So 3 of us have looked at it, and as I looked at the lease, one, the $1 a year decision was made a long time ago on a lease intended to run for many years, but the lease involves a really complex set of issues, involve public policy, service delivery, public health, and liability. So I can't say that it's an ethics violation for the city to give somebody for a very small price, access to a valuable piece of property, given that the liability remains with that third party, and all the liability for medical malpractice and stuff doesn't seem to wash over to the city, at least the way I read the lease. So again, I can't find such an imbalance in the quid pro quo that I see it as an ethics issue within the jurisdiction of this board. Two allegations concerning exclusivity or inclusivity. One was that the board of directors includes no one from a majority black census district. And the second one is that the 10-person executive staff only includes one African American. The city ethics ordinance says that the city's appointed officials shall take all practical steps to continue the city's current practice of ensuring that not only the most ethical individuals are employed or promoted by the city and appointed by the city to its various citizen boards and committees. So that probably would include the board of directors. So certainly the ordinance talks about ethical individuals being appointed, but it doesn't speak directly to diversity, and it again is that ethics ordinance that provides our jurisdiction. And the fifth thing that, because it involves money, that could arguably wash into an ethics discussion was the tax exempt status of TMH, which Dr. Hollifield was concerned about them not addressing a number of issues that are kind of societal issues: firearm injuries, unwed pregnancies, poverty, sexually transmitted diseases. Again, when I went back and read the city ordinance, and in terms of what it says our jurisdiction is, I can't see how we get to those issues. So again, as I did at the last meeting, I commend Dr. Hollifield for finding an issue that he cares deeply about, staying on the issue, staying on message, and continuing to push. And I would never criticize him for doing that. I can't find things, at least in what he gave us in writing, that fit in my mind squarely within the jurisdiction of the board. So unless somebody else on the board raises it, it would not be my intention to pursue any of those things. That said, I think that some of those things will go directly into our discussion of our self-evaluation, and one of the items in that self-evaluation would be the jurisdiction of the board. So I think it feeds into where we're headed this meeting and next.
And Mr. Chair, may I?
Yes, please, you're recognized.
I think also in light of this line of discourse that's going to come up, it's included in our booklet, but it calls for us to also look at what the ordinance says, what the actual ethics code is. From what I hear you say that our jurisdiction obviously is limited and it's within the ambit of what the ordinance states. But being that, at least my view of it, the reason for my call for us to look at our actual ethics code is that it's quite limited. And from my review of materials that were provided for us, our sister counties, cities have much more detailed ordinances that we can perhaps model ourselves after, which would then raise or at least expand our jurisdiction in terms of some of the issues that have come before us. For example, the conflict of interest thing. And as you said, reasonable people could disagree about if conflict of interest falls within the ethics ordinance. I am one of those that would see a issue of conflict of interest would, presumably fall within an ethics ordinance or ethics code, rather should. So far as our current code does not, I think is a lacuna that we should be resolving. So as we move into the future, as our jurisdiction might expand based upon what our ordinance says, that might also mean that many of these issues are appropriately addressed by this board. Okay.
You were breaking up a little bit, so for the record, I want to do a very bad summary. Mr. Ojitayo basically said that he was piggybacking, I think, on that last discussion and saying that he is concerned about the narrowness of the jurisdiction of the board, having reviewed the jurisdictions of the boards from other cities, thinks that there are opportunities to expand our jurisdiction in areas such as conflict of interest, which he sees as pretty clearly falling within what most people would perceive as the jurisdiction of an ethics review body. He said it more eloquently and with a number of other thoughts, but just to summarize that for the record.
May I?
Yes, very nicely put and pithy. Less no questions than I.
Thank you, Mr. Uchtayo. Mr. Friedman, you're recognized. I think largely what we have here at present, given the state of the statute and everything, our ordinance that we're operating under, is a situation where we don't have jurisdiction. That said, there's nothing to stop us from getting on a bully pulpit and sending a letter to the City Commission telling them that although we did not find in these instances that we have jurisdiction, it is our opinion that there are some things going on that they should be aware of and that perhaps they might not want to be, going on the way it is presently.
Right.
Can we do that?
We could. I will tell you that Dr. Hollifield has made that same presentation and given that same
We're not
handout to
Dr.
the City Commission.
We're one of the city boards.
I understand, but it
we're
won't
raising
be
it.
new information to them. It would
Doesn't
only
matter
be
if it's
our
new.
opinion. Yes.
They hear the same thing enough times, they might notice it.
Okay, is that in the nature of a motion, or is
It
that
is.
something you would like on our agenda for next month?
No, I'd like a motion that essentially you take the presentation that you gave, bring it to letter form. If you want to present it next meeting, then we can discuss it.
All right. Is there any discussion of that? I have a motion to basically, on those 5 points that in my view were kind of broadly ethics related, to convert those into a letter or a memorandum to the City Commission from us saying, well, we don't see anything here that's within the jurisdiction of this board. We think there are concerns here that probably deserve to be followed up from our perspective. Is there any discussion of that motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir, you're recognized.
My only sort of reticence about that is, insofar as we're moving forward with discussing the ethics code, and that would be, this board has been empowered by the charter to promulgate an ethics code, and that's the avenue by which we can perhaps look to expanding our jurisdiction. Then I think a more practical and perhaps a more forceful response would be just to address it through the promulgation of a more robust ethics code, unless we just want to do sort of the letter as a shot across the bow first and then address it later.
If I may address,
it could be duplicative.
Okay, Mr. Friedman.
if I may address your remark, I wholly agree with you. However, I know what we have now, and I have no idea what we may get. To do nothing, I think, is the wrong thing to do.
Well,
If we think
I guess
that there's
my
an
question-
issue, I think we should at least raise it. If it goes nowhere, that's fine, but at least we were not silent.
Okay.
So here's the thing, though. What is the urgency of addressing it right now versus us working on the code, expanding our jurisdiction, and taking a more, practical and forceful approach at a later date down the road? Not to say we're not going to address it or touch on it. It's just that we don't have the power right now, except it. But when we might perhaps have actual power to address it, let us address it then.
The answer to that, I would say, is that if we don't do something right now, it appears as if we've done nothing.
All right, well, let's do this.
There's no second.
Well, I know we're just on a discussion. We're not. Yes, sir. Absolutely not. This was, we're kind of off the script here, so if Mr. Poitevin, if you would like to come to the microphone and speak. And while you're walking up, let me just say that if we do this, what we would have is a draft letter that would be on our agenda for next month, along with whatever else comes out of this meeting in terms of our self-evaluation. And I can see both an upside and a downside. The upside is that we are taking action that is where we don't have clear ethics jurisdiction. The downside is if we're asking to expand our jurisdiction, one of the responses might be, well, you don't need an expansion of your jurisdiction, just write one of these memos for anything that's outside your jurisdiction, so you don't need anything else.
Well, I think we all need to think about that, and there's a good possibility if you draft the letter, we could table it.
Right. So, okay, Mr. Poitevin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for my possible rudeness for intervening here. Thank you for hearing me, though. I'm concerned that apparently you, sir, have taken these 5 issues and made a decision on whether or not jurisdiction exists. That concerns me if I understand what happened. My understanding of the procedure of this board is that such matters first go to the ethics officer, who is to review any kinds of factual circumstances presented to her and make a decision, and then make recommendations to the board.
Yes, sir, she did that.
That was done?
Yes, sir. She had previously reviewed Dr. Holofield's concerns. Then it was after his presentation to us that I told him that I personally would do my own review independent of hers, which is, I recognize, outside of our normal process. It was layering on an additional bit.
Then those issues that you've just been discussing will be on the ethics officer report at some point. We'll see that she reviewed those things.
Her report, I don't think, goes through the individual points. It was about his concerns more broadly, because has been raising this pretty much the same set of concerns, which much of which is history. So there's a lot of it that isn't current activity. But yes, she has spent. I'll let you.
Let me just share that I don't write on the report generally the name of the complainant. Okay. But starting the second day of my work here, I was in contact with him, and I can't remember what the issue was that day, but most of the issues relate generally to the hospital. Those have been documented. I document every call. Likewise, he's had concerns with the construction of the Big Ben Cares Clinic on South Monroe Street.
What was your concern on that?
What was my concern?
Here, why we're even talking about this or any of these issues, but what was your specific concern on that issue?
Well,
how did it come to you?
he called me, and he calls, and generally what he says is that his complaint isn't, he recognizes things are not within the jurisdiction of this board. He looks for, as a community activist, any pulpit he can get to advocate for issues that to him are very important. He's come here and made presentations. He understands when I speak to him, I'm very clear that I'm going to write this down, and I don't see this as a violation of our city ethics code. I make recommendations to him of individuals with whom he may work to assist him in dealing with those issues, but I close each and every one of those. I can probably go through my sheet, which I won't do, and highlight all of the calls that have come.
Well, my concerns, excuse me, my concerns were not whether or not what you did was legally sound, but rather the procedural question that I had. That whether I did not know at the time I raised the issue, that had come to you first, and you had made recommendations to the chair.
And he came, Mr. Poitevin, Dr. Holyfield came to the last board meeting and basically reiterated prior issues that we'd already talked about. And I think in consideration of that, and in consideration of the fact these had been closed, the chair very kindly offered to take a second look, like an appeal, to see if there may be something I missed.
Okay, my final question on this procedurally again, if you will. Was there any inquiry made of board council on the jurisdiction issue?
No, sir. We have talked about the jurisdiction, the breadth of our jurisdiction in the past, but not on this specific issue.
Is there any possibility that that inquiry would be made to board council?
Well, we certainly can do it. Did you get a copy of Dr. Hollifield's paper last time, I think?
I think it was in the materials.
Yes, it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I certainly recognize the fact that you're an experienced attorney, and I don't mean to give offense. I don't mean that. Just procedurally, again, is my only concern, and I'll shut up with one final comment. I agree that the board needs to do something, if I may, and to not do anything may be not the path that is most advisable, in my opinion.
Well, and I will tell you that one of the big reasons that I wanted specifically he gave us a written document, and we knew that we were going to spend a good part of this meeting and the next meeting talking about the future of the board, which includes one of the big issues is our jurisdiction. And it seemed to me that where we have someone who is passionate about an issue, who's been on the issue for a while, looked at it, done a good bit of research going back for decades, and someone who believes they have a very serious concern that needs to be taken seriously, that was, for me, also a good learning experience to look at that in light of the jurisdiction of this board, given that we are going to be talking about potentially making some recommendations concerning the jurisdiction of the board. So from my perspective, it was a two-edged sword.
Sure. My only concern, again, was it seemed to be outside the procedure that we usually follow, and so I just wanted to inquire on that, but thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
And the other piece is, quickly, that we've been trying to be very diligent in our use of outside counsel. So since I'm already a lawyer as well, and our chair is a lawyer, I kind of was trying to not have to bill the citizens for that review when I think I already knew what the answer was. And certainly if our board counsel had thought I was incorrect at any point, I know that he would have corrected me, so.
Okay. And
Inquiry was made to board council, though?
excuse me?
You say that you had given your opinion to board council?
He sees the call sheet before each meeting.
But we do not ask him to review all of Julie's work because we're just trying to keep down billable hours. Okay, this is an issue we'll inevitably come back to, but we're still on a motion. We're on your motion.
Let me respond to you just for a second. I agree with you. I think the first thing I said was I don't think we had jurisdiction on this. But that does not mean that as a board, seeing something that we feel to be possibly not the way it ought to be, that we should just walk away. The more time something is fleshed out for the city commission, the better chance there is that they're liable to take it seriously. That's my point, and that's my only point. If we don't do it, that's fine. If we do it, it's fine. If we get enough under the charter to do something, fine. But I just don't think we should walk away from something that we see that kind of leaves me with a funny feeling. I don't know what's wrong, but something is. And that's why I would hate to see us not do the letter, not get the additional charter stuff, and basically ignore a problem. That's my only point.
Let me point out.
And that's as a citizen, not even as a board member.
Let me point out for everybody that in the charter amendment, it says, and I'll read from the charter amendment, the ethics board shall assist the city commission in the development of the ethics code. So I think all of this discussion fits broadly within that, whether it is writing a letter, whether it is some recommendations that might come out of this board about specific amendments to the city ethics code or even to the charter itself. I do not know exactly where we will land, but I think all of this is precisely what I was hoping we would be talking about, spending most of our time on this month and next.
Toward that end, I'm going to withdraw the motion because I think the best way to proceed is toward the charter first. We know that this is there. If that does not work out, then we can bring it up again.
Okay, and certainly.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, yes.
I know the motion's been withdrawn, but I was going to make a comment. Is it too late?
No, Mr. Davis, please. I think we're still on discussion, and I'm going to come back to Mr. Ojitayo.
The Tallahassee Memorial, in my opinion, is a fine institution with fine people, many, many fine people who have served there for years and years. I know one of my closest friends for 20-plus years worked there for 20-plus years. He's an African-American gentleman, dear friend. He's only spoken with great respect for that hospital and the people there. So I think we need to be careful here when we start talking about a hospital or an institution in this city that has a long-standing reputation of doing so much good for this community and so many people there who are good people. And I think if we go beyond our jurisdiction, any institution who does that can harm our reputation with the community. I don't think we've been asked to do a job, but we haven't been asked to go beyond that job. We haven't been asked to do too little. We haven't been asked to go beyond it. And I believe we will harm our reputation if we go beyond it in measures like this. I don't doubt at all the genuineness of Dr. Holyfield, or Mr. Holyfield, Dr. Holyfield, I'm sorry. He seems like a genuine man with genuine concerns, and I respect him for his concerns and the way he comes to try to share his concerns. And if he ever uncovers something that's absolutely right on point, I will praise him for it. Mm-hmm. And I think this community should. But anyway, those are some of my thoughts.
Well, and Julie has reminded me that Dr. Holyfield has also made this exact presentation to the board of TMH. And actually, and I think he said at the last month that when he presented and gave them the same document he gave us, that he was pleased that the chair of the board gave him a positive response. So I think his voice is being heard. And I would encourage us as a group to focus on the future of this board and where we are headed more broadly than just this particular issue, although I think this issue is a good example of the possible limitations of our jurisdiction, which is what we'll be discussing. So I've recognized Mr. Friedman now. I'm going to recognize the fact that he withdrew his motion. I have my notes typed up. If they are, it is conceivable if anybody ever wants, if the board ever wants to do some kind of a letter, we can do that. But for the moment, let's continue. Let's go, since I got us way off of our agenda. And I'm sorry, Mr. Ojitayo, I said I'd recognize you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say here to Mr. Friedman withdrawal. But also, I would like to add that this discussion, sort of responding to Mr. Davis's point, this discussion isn't so much about Dr. Holyfield's specific allegations. I'm less concerned about that, more about the chair's analysis of it, insofar as the overriding theme is that we don't have jurisdiction, and even on issues that seemingly should or could fall within our jurisdiction, but for the limitations of the ethics code. So that was my point, and that as the chair said, this fits broadly into our approach and us moving forward as a board and what our ethics code should be. And I've talked about this in a previous meeting about the need to really look at our ethics code and beef it up. So those were my only sort of points, and it's less so about Dr. Holyfield's specific allegations.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ojitayo. Well, I've gotten us a good running start on our item 11 on our agenda when we get to item 11. That said, we are now on item 6, which is public comment on agenda items, and I have cards from Mr. Wilcox and Mr. Poitevin.
We do ethics moment and...
Oh, I'm sorry, did I? No, I just completely skipped over those because
number 4.
I'm obviously
4, 5, and 6.
completely, discombobulated at this point. I'll drop back to where we're supposed to be. Item 4 is Mr. Ojtayo will be with us this month and next, and then beginning in January, we will have a new appointee from FAMU, Bryan Smith, who is also a lawyer, and I think Ms.
met him.
Meadows-Keefe is going to give us just a brief introduction to him. I didn't know if he was going to be here, but if you could do a few sentences so we'll know a little bit about him and his qualifications.
It's a pleasure. Upon receiving the letter from Dr. Robinson, I was really pleased FAMU moved quickly to make the appointment so we wouldn't have any gaps in our service. Mr. Smith and I spoke on the phone, and I met him today and gave him 3 notebooks full of information, and he didn't run screaming from the building. He is eminently qualified for the seat. He was the chair of the DeKalb County Ethics Board in Georgia, so that covers the city of Atlanta. I shared with him that he probably wouldn't get as many interesting issues here as he did in Atlanta, but I also have immediately tasked him with the chair's assent. I'm going to probably give him 1 free month in January, but in February or March, I think it would be great for this board to hear from him about his service on that board. And the short version is the city commission, or the commission, funded and then didn't fund, and appointed and didn't appoint, and a lot of his issues are very interesting. So he was going to try to be here. He may appear, at which point, Mr. Chair, I will signal you and you can recognize and introduce him. But right now his job at FAMU is he is the ombudsman for the students and the faculty. So he gets all the complaints from everybody. So I think he's going to be a great addition to the board.
Okay, and I personally will be sorry to see Mr. Ojtayo go. Now, item 5 on our agenda is the ethics moment, and I believe that Ms. Meadows-Keefe is going to talk in large measure about what's going on in the Florida House of Representatives.
I'm going to do that second. The first one was the one that was actually included in your agenda. I always find interesting things after the agenda goes out, but one was just quickly on a county commissioner in Monroe County, and he came before the Florida Ethics Commission last month. And gosh, it was a big, long complaint that he got one contract with an animal services rescue organization canceled, negated, and then saw to it that a friend of his organization received the contract. So it was a real convoluted complaint that had many counts to it. Lots of proof, and how the bid was arrived at, et cetera, and again, like 7 allegations. All of the allegations were disproven, except for the ones related to disclosure. And I know the chair and we have trained on the filling out of the disclosure form. He had to fill out a full and public disclosure of financial interests. He did that in a substandard way. He'd gotten, for example, gifts of municipal golf course memberships and other things that he did not declare on that form. They took a real hard look at it and figured out that he had disclosed assets and liabilities without sufficient specificity in those items, and much to his detriment, he at one point told an investigator with the Ethics Commission that I always looked at filing financial disclosure as a pain in the expletive. So in how not to respond to an Ethics Commission investigator, don't say that the disclosure form is inconvenient for you to fill out. So he was found to be in violation of the ethics code in terms of the disclosure. So once there was a problem with the disclosure of the golf course, they went on to the other items in the form and found issues with those. The second piece that I wanted to bring to your attention that's come out is the House Speaker Corcoran's new ethics rules on ethics, lobbying, and transparency. And these have been causing a lot of discussion in Tallahassee. I've provided for you the news release on some of the provisions that will be included. And for example, appropriation projects have to be filed as standalone bills, that House members will not be able to fly on jets, private planes owned by lobbyists. I discovered that there is a great video that the House put out to educate the public on those new rules. I plan to, for the ethics moment next month, with your permission, to actually share that video, because I think it's something we could do. It's catchy and cute to educate the public on some of our rules. But these are kind of groundbreaking and should make for an interesting legislative session.
They definitely will, and they have raised lots of questions. I can tell you that, particularly I teach a class on the appropriations process at the graduate school at FSU, and students were profoundly interested in how that was going to change the appropriations process, particularly those who work in the House or the Senate who are taking the class. But that's been it's going to be very fascinating to watch.
And in the article that I found in Florida Watchdog, I did see Mr. Wilcox reference. So for whatever work you did, obviously worked.
Okay. I've been kind of jumping around here like a beagle I used to have years ago, and I always try to, if I'm going to model myself after anything, I try to model myself after the old Basset Hound I had, who moved at a much better pace. Ms. Phillips, have I ignored you at any point?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. And Ms. McNeil, you've pointed and nodded, and so I assume we're okay? All right. Thank you for letting me catch up there. Now we are on agenda item 6. So I have first Mr. Wilcox.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board, and Ethics Officer Meadows Keefe. I'm Ben Wilcox with Citizens for Ethics Reform, and I know most of you remember that Citizens for Ethics Reform was the organization that came together, gathered the signatures, put the charter amendment on the ballot, which then eventually passed with 67% of the vote, creating you, the Ethics Board. First of all, I'd like to thank you for offering this opportunity for us to come and give you some feedback on how the board is doing as you're preparing to enter your 3rd year of operation. And I'd also like to thank you for all of the great work the board has done, and each of you individually for your service. I'm going to start by making some comments, and then my colleagues, I think, I know they put in cards. They meant to put in cards to come up during this part of the session. My comments today are I hope you take them as being constructive, because that's what they are. I think while much has been accomplished by the Ethics Board, I'm a little concerned about the public's perception of the board and your relevance or lack of relevance in the community. When Julie let us know that you wanted our feedback, we notified our contacts. Marilyn sent out a message to members of the League of Women Voters, letting them know that you were requesting feedback. And I think you can tell by the attendance here today that not too many people care to give feedback. And I'm struggling with why that is. Perhaps it's because they don't see the board doing very much besides administrative and organizational kinds of work. I think the board needs to be somewhat more aggressive and assert its independence in two areas, and I think my fellow Citizens for Ethics Reform members will probably have some other suggestions as well. Both of my suggestions come from opinions that were issued by your counsel, Mr. Currington. First, at a previous meeting, Mr. Currington advised the board that you do have the power to self-initiate investigations if a board member sees something that doesn't look right in the way the city is conducting itself. This is a power that the state Florida Commission on Ethics does not have. It's a very powerful, could potentially be a very powerful tool, and I would suggest you consider using that ability to self-initiate more. It would give the public more confidence that the board is indeed a watchdog and not a lapdog, which sometimes the Florida Commission on Ethics is referred to as a lapdog and weak. One possible example of an investigation that the board might have initiated involved a report that was in the Tallahassee Democrat a while back concerning the fact that city staffers traveled to New York City for a meeting to try to bring JetBlue, the airline, to Tallahassee. I think it was April 15th when I saw the report or when this event happened. But the records show that city officials and Visit Florida representative racked up $1,200 dinner tab at a steakhouse in Manhattan. The six-person outing was part of a JetBlue recruiting effort. They had had a meeting earlier in the day with JetBlue, and the attendee list for the dinner did not include JetBlue officials, although city officials defended the dinner, saying that they had invited JetBlue to attend and they didn't attend. You know, I mean, it's a simple thing that, you know, when people read a report like that, I think there would be some concerns, and that would be a simple incident, I guess, for the board to initiate an investigation, just make a determination of whether JetBlue was invited, or if not, you know, that city officials just attended this dinner on their own. The other opinion that Mr. Currington gave that I want to speak to is the one that you've just been talking about, and that is your jurisdiction over just the ethics code for the city of Tallahassee, and not any of the state ethics code that's contained in Chapter 112. I think, and your earlier discussion illustrated it perfectly, I think the board needs to be more aggressive, recommend some ordinances to the city commission that would expand your jurisdiction. You know, it's really, the city's ethics code as it stands now is pretty narrow, and is not going to allow you to look into or consider, you know, violations of more serious things that are in Chapter 112. And that's about it for me. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. I would point out to you something that was in one of the earlier handouts, actually. Ms. Meadows-Keefe in her ethics moment had a handout of what the city produces every year to give to the employees.
Oh, the annual reminder, or whatever you call it.
And I was impressed in reading the annual reminder that much of the material in there that seems to me to be pretty directly ethics related is not in the ethics code, but is in the employee handbook. So there are certainly places where the city has elaborated rules that I think are pretty clearly ethics related, but they're just not rules that relate to the jurisdiction of this board. So I agree with you. I think there really is some low-hanging fruit and some opportunities, and that's what we're hoping this month and next month will be about. So those are perfect comments. Much appreciated.
All right. Thank you, Mr.
Any other comments from board members? Okay. Our next presenter would be Mr. Poitevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding the comments made earlier on the attendance of the public, the interest of the public in the board activities, I was encouraged to see in today's paper a notice of this public meeting. And I think that we need to do a lot more of that, more outreach, more public notices of the meetings, and create some air of interest for the public. Perhaps we could get the media to assist more and the media to be present more. We have been asked to provide our input and provide our recommendations, and thank you for that, for giving us the opportunity. And we do have some recommendations as to what items we believe might improve the board or assist the board.
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Poitevin, just in a point of fairness, if you talk it directly into the microphone. Thank you, sir.
The first item that we are making recommendations on is that this board draft an ordinance for the city, which in essence requires all city employees to report ethical violations or suspected ethical violations to the ethics officer. An ordinance requiring that they take that action. And when in doubt, report. And the ethics officer can determine those that fall within the jurisdiction of the board or not, as she always does. So an ordinance to be presented to the city commission recommending that city employees must report violations to the ethics officer. We also recommend an ordinance requiring any ethics and violations conducted by any element of the city should be conducted by the ethics board. If this board is to be the ethical conscience of the city, the ethical guide for the city, this board needs to be, in our opinion, the entity doing the ethics investigations of all city employees, elected or appointed. Obviously, you can't have many standards by supervisors or division chiefs or city commissioners or anybody else determining whether or not ethics investigation should be conducted or whether or not an ethics violation has occurred. All of those issues should come before this board reported to the ethics officer, in our opinion. Again, that is a recommendation of a draft ordinance to the city commission requiring that reporting procedure. We believe that the board is to have sole, primary, if not sole, ethics investigation authority in the city. We are also recommending that any conversation by any member of this board, including the ethics officer, the board counsel, or perhaps in the future other staff members, any conversation by those people with any public official on issues that are to come before the board should be read into the record, reported to the board, read in the record at the next ethics board meeting. In conjunction with that, we recommend this board create a form, a reporting form for members to fill out when they have had a conversation with any public official regarding issues that have come before the board or reasonably will be expected to come before this board. Another issue that we have seen very little of on this board, but have seen in other commission and other places, we see what we believe is a violation of the spirit of the Sunshine Law. The Sunshine Law, of course, requires that any member of a board does not discuss, prohibits discussion between board members or just in any environment other than in a public meeting. The way that sunshine prohibition is avoided by many officials is they simply use an intermediary. It may be the city attorney, it may be a city manager, it may be the ethics officer, it may be anybody, no accusations made. It could be anybody that goes to the board members to, in essence, lobby for a consensus or to bring issues before the members individually to bring a consensus prior to a meeting. And that is something we hope will not happen, has not happened, don't have any reason to believe it has happened, but hope it will not happen. And that the use of an intermediary will not be allowed by this board on issues that are coming before the board. We have been largely pleased, if we may, by the activities of the ethics officer. She obviously is hardworking and has tried to keep this board and the public, I think, well informed. And we remember that, we urge you to remember always that that the ethics officer, and now it's Julie, next year it may be someone else, so there needs to be some guide to constantly remember, to constantly remind the ethics officer that he or she works for this board. The board does not serve the ethics officer. The ethics officer serves the board. You have discussed the possibility of hiring an investigator. As many of you know, my background is also law enforcement and prosecution. And we are suggesting that when a decision is made to hire an investigator, that investigator be independent to an extent that he or she is administratively subordinate to the ethics officer, but operationally subordinate to the board. That is a structure that, in my experience, has worked well, and it eliminates any possibility of suggestion of impropriety by a supervisor determining the content of investigative activity or report. We also recommend that in the future, to assist the ethics officer, anytime a complaint is received and she makes a decision that that case should be closed without further action, that each of those decisions, with all respect, there should be an oversight procedure by a member of the board to review those closures. We recommend that that oversight member be a rotating member, not a committee of one, but rather a different member of the board each time. That will assist, I think, the ethics officer, will take some pressure off of the ethics officer and be an assistance to her, we hope. That would be our intention. We are recommending also, well aware of the conversation previously this evening, we are recommending that the ethics board should never hold a meeting without the presence of board counsel. Now, budgetary items aside, and I certainly understand Mr. Currington does not come cheap. Well, if he wanted cheap, he wouldn't have Mr. Currington. So I understand that the budgetary items are certainly on everyone's mind, but they must be resolved in favor of legal guidance, legal presence. It is not acceptable to me to say we're not going to send this item to board counsel for an opinion because we can't afford to send it to him. There must be a resolution other than that. Regarding board counsel, we have also suggested that the board give board counsel very specific guidance as to whether or not the board wants him to intervene and advise this board if during a meeting or otherwise the actions of the board are inadvertently drifting into either unlawful, unethical, or procedurally incorrect activity. That is, the board council should feel free to intervene as those discussions are occurring if he sees a drift off center. We believe also that there has been, and again, I say this with respect, the city commission, we know there are members of the city commission who wanted a different ethics board. They created their own ethics board, and the citizens came back and created this board. And when the citizens came back and created this board, they sent a very clear message. It's called the independent board because there should be almost no connection between this board and the city commission. And every time this board receives input from any city commissioner, city manager, city employee, city attorney, anyone else, then that independence is threatened. And if the public must know that this board is going to be free to act, whether that's against a crew member of a city work crew, or the city manager, the citizens must know that this board has the authority and the gumption to move forward in such cases. That's only going to be achieved by absolute independence. And when we inappropriately, in my opinion, ask for legal guidance from the city attorney, when we inappropriately discuss any items on this board with city commissioners or city staff, that independence again is being threatened. We hope that the influence, to whatever extent that now exists, over this board by the city commission or city staff be terminated, reduced to the greatest possible level. There are going to be times when board council or other members of this board very well may need to speak with city commission. But that needs to be, under the previous recommendation we made, that needs to be publicly noted. I had a meeting with Commissioner so-and-so, we discussed the following. That's fine. Again, and in closing, let me say that this board must be the independent of any input from any elected or appointed official of the city of Tallahassee. And until the public believes that that's occurring, there are going to continue to be comments questioning the independence of this board. It hurts me when I see those comments questioning the board's independence. And I want to do whatever I can to assist the board in achieving that independence and the belief by the public that that independence is paramount.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Portman. Any questions, Mr. Portman? Ms. Phillips.
I have one question for clarification. An ordinance for reporting procedure? I didn't understand your comment.
Anytime a member of the board or staff has a conversation with any member of the city commission or city staff or any member.
That wasn't the one. It was two before that. It was before the sole ethics complaint reviewer or whatever. It was after the employee should or must report ethics violations. Then you said something about ordinance for reporting procedure.
Mandatory reporting? Was it mandatory reporting?
Yeah, that's what it was, I think.
I don't know, because I didn't.
I recommended that the board create a form of its own that
No,
the members...
that wasn't the one.
Well,
It was before that.
I'm sorry, I didn't go in order, so...
Oh, okay.
Ms. Phillips, was it the one where, I have in my notes, the fourth point was for the board to draft an ordinance that city employees must report suspected ethics violations to the ethics officer for resolution, and then following that was an ordinance that any ethics the review or investigation of any ethics violations that are reported must be conducted by the board, so that you would not have an independent review, for instance, conducted by the city attorney, independent of us.
Okay.
Is that where the part you were in?
Yes, that's the part that I didn't, right. I understood the purpose, the reporting form for conversations with city officials. It was before that. I just wasn't clear. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else on item 6, or do you want to go now? And because we've kind of pretty much washed into item 11. So Ms. Wills, you want to go first, or Mr. Batzine? Okay, Ms. Wills, you're recognized.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Marilyn Wills. I'm with the Citizens for Ethics Reform, and I'd like to talk about the $25 rebate program. While the $25 rebate program was passed overwhelmingly in 2014, the Ethics Board has not been seen as a strong supporter of that program. The intent of the program was to involve more of the community in financing elections rather than leaving it to just a few big money donors. And Ethics Officer Julie Meadows Keefe has made an attempt to educate the community by addressing various organizations. I know she was a speaker at one of our League of Women Voters meetings. However, we, the Citizens for Ethics Reform, we feel that the whole board and city government should be encouraging citizens to participate in this program. As one of the former candidates for the City Commission said of the program, quote, "People are feeling disconnected from City Hall. This could be a way for people to be more involved in the process, and that's a great thing," unquote. Programs of this type have been successful in other communities, including Miami and New York City, and we feel that it will be successful here in Tallahassee, especially if the Ethics Board encourages voters to participate. And of course, we will be glad to work with you on the issue. Any questions?
Any comments for Ms. Wills? Mr. Friedman?
Is there any chance at some point you could come forward with some suggestions as to how we could better advertise it next year?
Yes, I thought we should
Please.
do that. Yes.
I mean, we'd like to do the best we can, I'm sure.
Right.
And
We'd be glad to work with you on
Yeah.
that.
something I've thought about is you think about that some more. The last sentence in section 4 of the charter amendment says the Ethics Board may hear complaints or initiate proceedings and levy civil penalties relating to alleged violations of this section. So as you think about specific things that we ought to do, will you keep in mind, please, that we need to be careful that we don't end up in a situation where if there were ever a complaint concerning, say, a candidate, that we would be unable to exercise our responsibilities because we would all have to recuse ourselves for having been involved as proponents of a program or proponents of certain actions under the program. I want to make sure that anything that I do as a member of this board does not preclude me, if a complaint comes before the board, does not force me to have to step away from that complaint because I was involved in the activity.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I had a question.
Yes.
Ms. Wills? Mr. Chairman?
Yes, I'm sorry. You're recognized, Mr. Davis.
Ms. Welch, you mentioned that this similar program in Miami and New York City has proven to be successful. Can you give us any more details on the feedback?
I do have an example in a paper that I read about the New York City situation, and I can probably find that for you. It was a person who had run statewide before and only spoke to donors who gave him $1,000 at least. And then when he was running for something local in New York City where they had a program like this, he found himself talking to all of his constituents for a change. And that was the kind of thing that we were hoping for. And, but I will look for that and give that to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
That'd be much appreciated. Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Wills? Okay, Mr. Butzine, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you. My name is Peter Butzine. I'm active in Common Cause, which is part of the Ethics Coalition. I've resided at 1628 Woodgate Way since 1979. And yesterday, my wife came home from the FSU basketball game and found me typing away busily on my computer, and she asked, this was at 8 o'clock at night, she asked, what in the world are you working on? And I said, well, I'm preparing my remarks for the Ethics Board meeting tomorrow. And she responded by saying, well, why bother? Do they actually do anything? Well, our discussion, I think last night, points to the Ethics Board's challenge. After 2 years of understandably necessary organizational meetings, I would like to respectfully argue that it's time for this board to show that it's really serious about demonstrating its independence, advocating for a stronger ethics ordinance, and initiating investigations. Now, I also need to be fair to my wife because she also responded by suggesting that perhaps there is no ethics problem in the city of Tallahassee. And you don't know my wife, but she is no rabble-rouser. She is a member of an existing City of Tallahassee advisory board. She just fulfilled a term on a advisory board for the county. She's an active, committed citizen. Well, I explained to her that the issue is not whether there is an ethics problem in the city, but rather that when 67% of voters in this community approved the charter amendment in 2010, they were sending a clear and compelling message of support for effective and enforceable ethics standards. To my knowledge, you comprise the only body in the city of Tallahassee that is truly an independent, voluntary advisory board. And I beg you to take that independence seriously. You are beholden neither to Lou Shelley nor to the commissioners. You not only have the power, but I would argue the responsibility to independently initiate investigations. Now, the charter also charges you with suggesting improvements to the city's extraordinarily weak and unspecific ethics ordinance. I invite you today, I plead with you today, to take that charge seriously and start adding some beef to the law so that the people of Tallahassee can be confident that their votes in 2010 actually made a difference. To her credit, Julie has put together a detailed workbook that can and should point this board toward its next phase. Its 185 pages provide a guide to creating a comprehensive best practices approach for a new ethics ordinance in the city of Tallahassee. Now, when we suggested that this board be guided by the experience and work of similar boards in other jurisdictions around the state, most noticeably in Jacksonville, Julie responded to us by saying that, well, in Tallahassee, we do things the Tallahassee way. Well, respectfully, I suggest that this board should learn from your counterparts in Hillsborough, Orange, Palm Beach, and especially Duval counties. They've done a lot of good work prior to the creation of this board. Take the best from those ordinances to craft a strong, enforceable package to present to the City Commission. Now, to put this in some kind of context, I'd also like to say that, like many people a week ago, I was shocked by the results of last Tuesday's presidential election. However, I would point out that in the tumult of that election, there was much good news for ethics and campaign finance reform at the local level. I believe that those successes reflect some of the outrage voters expressed in the primary and general elections. And while many pundits have interpreted the presidential election as a win for racism, misogyny, xenophobia, and the alt-right, I see at least a narrow silver lining. And that silver lining reflects a disgust with Washington and its stubborn embrace of insidious, soft corruption while miserably failing to tackle the pressing needs and problems of this nation. When we all pushed for the Tallahassee Charter Ethics Initiative, we believed, as we still believe, that the answer to gridlock in Washington is to have responsive local government. Now, we are blessed to live in a relatively well-managed city, a city that is relatively free of corruption. However, we also know that we must avoid complacency by continuing to improve the processes for making public policy. I recall a discussion that I had probably about 25 years ago with a city commissioner. And he told me, and this is a quote, he said, "The lack of a vigorous local press means that we as commissioners can pretty much get away with anything." Well, the loss of newspaper readers, advertisers, and investigative reporters means that the public needs to rely more on bodies like yours to ensure that our public officials act in the interest of its citizens. And toward this end, you obviously have a heavy burden. We urge you to take this responsibility seriously. Exercise your independence. Proactively investigate potential and actual conflicts of interest. Vigorously recommend that the City Commission adopt a much stronger and enforceable ethics ordinance. Now, to be sure, the City Commission may spurn your efforts, but we will help you. We will support you if you take your independence and your powers seriously. Thank you. I'd be happy to respond to any questions or comments.
Any comments or questions for Mr. Boutzine? I think you were crystal clear, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Well, you guys just expanded my to-do list quite a bit. Item 7 on our agenda, right after the break, we're going to come back and as a group, we're going to talk in depth about all of this stuff, I hope. Item 7, Mr. Currington, I think you were asked at the last meeting to look at what we would do regarding what we can do under the charter amendment regarding vacancies, and I think you now have an opinion for us.
I do.
You are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Chair. The question presented was whether the Board of Ethics may allow a member to continue in their office after the expiration of that member's term in the event that the appointing authority fails to timely make an appointment as contemplated by the November 4th, 2014 Charter Amendment. I think as everyone in this room recognizes that the Charter Amendment provided for such appointments by 5 different authorities within 60 days of a vacancy. I have answered the question by saying I don't think this board needs to allow or needs to appoint someone to fill the vacancy. Unfortunately, this is not clearly established. For example, the Florida Constitution provides for that state and county officials specifically hold over until their replacement qualifies for office, okay? But the Constitution fails to make the similar statement for municipal officials. I somewhat speculate, I think that may be because of Florida's strong home rule provisions, that the Florida statutes don't direct municipalities how to deal with vacancies in their office, but have left it up to the local governing jurisdictions. So my conclusion is that as a matter of law, based on insight we gather from the city charter and the city ordinances and this body's own bylaws. Again, somewhat unfortunately, the ethics code does not address holdovers, nor does the bylaws, nor does the city charter. We get indirect insight because the city does deal with the holdover of city commissioners and the mayor. Now, the case law suggests that the reason you have automatic holdovers is to avoid a hiatus in the process of filling vacancies. And that seems to be a good public policy to avoid an absence or a void in authority. I have concluded that using various rules of statutory construction, that the intent of the city commission was to avoid that hiatus for city commissioners and the mayor, and that if they had spoken to the issue, would probably apply the same logic of avoiding a hiatus to this board. But it did not do so. But when we look at rules of statutory construction, that you look to the evil to be avoided, I believe that the best construction to accomplish that purpose is to read the intent of the drafters of both the charter amendments and the ordinance to avoid vacancies in office. Granted, there are rules of statutory construction that could be argued to the contrary, but I think that would defeat the purpose. Again, if you accept that the evil to be avoided is hiatus in office, where this board becomes unable to act because you don't have a quorum. And I understand that's part of the reason for the request for this opinion, is so that we don't see a stalemate because we don't have a quorum.
Okay. So what I understand is if one of the appointing authorities, if the term of one of the appointees ended and that appointing authority did not act, that the previously appointed person could, if they're willing, continue to serve as a member of the board until the appointing authority did act.
That is correct.
Now, the secondary question in that was if we were at a situation where we had a formal complaint and we were in an adjudicatory, quasi-judicial adjudicatory process, would that member, if I were the chair, would I treat that member who was continuing beyond their originally appointed term as a regular member, or would I treat them somehow differently in that adjudicatory process?
You would treat them as any other member.
Okay. Okay, I just want to be crystal clear on that, and I'm fine with that. Now, of course, if we had a vacancy because someone could not serve and the appointing authority, or chose not to serve, or was removed for cause and the appointing authority hadn't acted, then we would just have a vacancy. But I think this is the far more likely case. And Mr. Freeman has comment. Mr. Freeman, you're right.
I got a question for our attorney. Right now, everybody's first term, but is it possible the same thing could happen sometime at the end of the second term? Would someone then be allowed to stay after the 2 terms that, I mean, because that would be, I think, contradictory to the bylaws otherwise, would it not?
Well, that's an intriguing question because, yes, I think there is a term limit of 2 consecutive terms. So we would have 2 conflicting interests. And candidly, I have not looked at that question.
Perhaps you should.
I certainly could. Again, I'm not in a position to spontaneously suggest how you resolve that conflict of public policy, but that would be a conflict of public policy.
If I might, the thing that scares me with that is the potential that somehow someone gets to the appointing authority and says, you know, I've been on this thing, I've done a really good job. How about I just stay? And you could wind up with a board in the wrong circumstances where people would be on it 10 and 20 years. And we certainly don't want to create a club. That's my concern.
Right, where I was just thinking exactly that. If the appointing authority chose not to act because they wanted to avoid the term limit nature of things, and of course, one of the appointing authorities is us, for 2 of the members of the board.
Sure.
And we shouldn't set ourselves up to say, well, if we don't take action, then we get to stay us, which seems a little in particular, a little self-serving. Let's, for the moment, let's not ask for a legal opinion on that particular point, because I think at that point we need to start flogging appointing authorities to do their job.
Suppose that we do something like this. Obviously, this could be handled within bylaw change, and we could say, and this only applies at the end of the first term. However, the person at the end of the second term must leave regardless of whether or not they've been, someone else has been appointed. You've got to do that.
Where is the term limit set out? Isn't that in the term limit's in bylaws, isn't it?
No, the term limits are in the ordinance. There's term limits for each seat. So, and it is limited to, Mr. Friedman, for example, is in his second
You're in your second term.
as is Mr. Davis. Ms. McNeil will be starting
Is the
her
term limit for 2 terms, or is it for 6 years?
You're asking me questions now.
Well, let's do this. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, would you come back at the next meeting with a change in the bylaws, and I'm going to take a little different spin that says that if someone has not yet, someone's term ends and they have not yet served for 6 years, for more than 2 consecutive full terms. Full term is 3 years. So one of the initial appointees could arguably, under this ordinance, serve for 8 years. Someone who's appointed for
correct.
2, they could serve 2 full terms after. So the initial appointees could get 7, 8, or 6. So I'm limited to 6, you'd be limited to 7. Mr. Currington.
Yes, I have concern both by Member Friedman and your comment about bylaw amendments. In footnote 7, I suggest that that's probably a problem and should be done by a charter amendment. Because with Mr. Friedman's example, we have a conflict in the charter that says 2 consecutive terms, yet it also has this scheme, using by way of example, if the state attorney makes one appointment, it needs to be the state attorney that appoints the vacancy and not this full board or not members voted on by the city commission. It needs to be the appointing authority. The people of Tallahassee wanted the state attorney's idea. So I think it'd be a charter amendment, not a bylaw.
Can I butt in one other time? Toward that end, one of my recommendations in reviewing this stuff was that when we do that we do a charter amendment and that we eliminate the court system as an appointing authority and take that board seat and transfer it as a 3rd seat appointed by the sitting board.
Okay, well, we're getting into our discussion on 11, but I think what I'm hearing, certainly I think our discussion will involve our 7th member, and then we need to talk about term limits, probably either in terms of an ordinance change, because it's an ordinance now, or in terms of a charter amendment. And maybe since the term limits right now are in the ordinance, that's probably an ordinance recommendation, and there's a lot of ways to skin that cat. We might say no person can serve more than 8 consecutive years, no person can serve more than 6 consecutive years. So, if you had an initial 1-year term, you could be reappointed for 3 and then reappointed for 2. But, whatever the magic number is that people want to do, I think we all think there ought to be some end to the joy. But by the same token, I think there is an advantage to people who've been here for a while and have had an opportunity to hear from the public and understand some of the trials and tribulations. So this is all stuff we're going to come back to under 11. But I think, Mr. Currington, we have your opinion, But you just pointed out an important point, and that is that it probably does need to be followed up with an ordinance change to work the best. Is that correct?
Well, I'm going to draw a distinction between a charter amendment and an ordinance.
So you think it's a charter? Your issue would be addressed by charter?
I think it's a charter amendment, because
Okay.
the charter talks about 2 consecutive terms,
Okay. Okay.
by way of example.
And the ordinance implemented the charter.
Ordinance implements the charter. Okay, so we are in charter territory, then not ordinance. I was wrong. Okay, well, then we'll come back to that on number 11, and I'm going to invite Mr. Currington to feel free to fully participate in our discussion when we get to agenda item 11. Ms. Phillips, we're on item 8. By your subcommittee of 1, bylaws and policy and procedures.
Right. This is an update. I gave one last month, but I've got actually more information this time. Julie and I have met again with purchasing and human relations or human resources to review in review of their policies and procedures. And I'm happy to report that the city conflict of interest is hot off the press. They've readopted it based on our ethics charter, and so that's been fantastic. Their purchasing is also looking at their vendor guide, because there are some issues that they want to address with the ethics information now. And Human Resources has assigned someone to work with Julie, and we will continue our work and report in December. They will probably have some suggestions on changes to the policies and procedures in that area. Are there any questions? And I had asked, I think last month, was there any area in which any of you thought that I should review with the city other than purchasing and HR? Those were the two that we felt would have the most opportunity for some sort of ethics violation, and wanted to put the employees on notice. They have, and you made this point, Mr. Chair, that on the annual reminder or critical policy recommendations was the ethics statement, and also there was something on the personnel policy and procedures manual that was dealing with ethics. So it's good to see that.
Right. No, I think personally, I think you've picked the perfect 2 areas. I have a friend who's just started writing a textbook on local government purchasing, and that is an area that is ripe for opportunities for people to inadvertently err.
I get the impression that what you're doing is having a really strong effect on the right end, the prevention of things occurring, which is what we would prefer. I mean,
We're trying to be proactive and get the word out, and where there need to be changes, then we'll make those. So,
City Commission also has policies and procedures.
Ms. Meadows-Keefe has a comment about.
Well, the City Commission also has policies and procedures for it. So as you're thinking, that may be another one to look at.
Okay. Very good. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, before the break, you're going to update us on the revised evaluation form.
Oh, that's mine.
That would be yours.
Well, it's Ms. Phillips also helped with it. As you all know, you evaluated me a few months ago, and there had been discussion before the evaluation which format you all wanted to use, and several formats were presented to you. Ms. Phillips, being the great wordsmith editor that she is, we met in a way to kind of tailor the evaluation form to the job description that replicates the responsibilities and actually gives board members an opportunity to rate the ethics officer on each element in the job description. So instead of just having those 5 or 6 broad categories, and some of you all didn't necessarily know enough to even rate there or didn't think it applied, we tailored the evaluation form to the job. So we're not just using, to the independence point, a city formatted evaluation form. We have made our own evaluation form to meet the board's needs, and then also to be fair to the ethics officer that he or she knows what's expected of him or her and what he or she will be measured on. So that is the result of the great work that Ms. Phillips helped me accomplish. It was mainly for information.
Right. Ms. Phillips, any comments?
I think, I don't know if you've had a chance to review it, and, but again, I think we really just zeroed in on the new job description and gave an opportunity for rating as well as comments.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I think this is really what we needed. It's excellent. It really is. It's very specific to what we need, and not a bunch of stuff that's irrelevant, which is what we were looking at before.
Right. For purpose of the recording, this is 9 pages, which probably equates to about 4 pages of text and then a lot of blanks for comments after the rating on each item. And the rating falls into broad categories, values and competencies.
I think this is superb.
With very specific things for everything from initiative to record keeping to communication skills, and an awful lot on pretty specific ethics activities and board support activities. So it is, while it is specific, it is also relevant. So I think it meets those 2 tests, although it still will be a bit of work to fill out for the evaluator, but
Probably more. But
probably more. Probably.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, we are going to take a break until...
Mr. Chair, do
Ms.
you
Phillips?
need board action on that item or not?
Why don't you make a motion?
Okay. I move that we adopt the performance management document for the independent ethics officer as presented.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Phillips and a second by Mr. Friedman. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, and it is adopted. Let's come back at 6:15. That gives a little more than a 15-minute break, and we will spend our last 45 minutes. We've spent a lot of time on item 11 already. We'll spend the rest of our time on that, and then the bulk of next meeting on that. So, okay? We are adjourned for a few minutes. we are on agenda item 11. I will start, I think on public comment, we pretty much covered item 11. If anybody else has any additional comments, please feel free to, or during the discussion, if you want to jump in and tell us that we are on the right track or on the wrong track, you are more than welcome. Okay, Julie gave us some lovely homework, a notebook that had all, well, not all, but a lot of resource materials for us that included what some other cities have done. What I'd like to do is, for structural purposes, break this into some component pieces. I'd like to start with what we as a board think that we ought to change, if anything, as it relates to our policies, procedures, and activities, and then move into recommendations that we would like to consider making to the city commission, and break those specifically into things that would be that they could do by policy, that would need to be done by ordinance, or to the extent that we know the difference, that would need to be done by a charter amendment, so that we kind of keep things a little bit organized and can get through this in a timely fashion. So if I can, what I'd like to do is take any comments that anybody has concerning changes that we ought to make, or that we want to have in a formal written fashion for the next meeting to consider for final passage, concerning board practices or board procedures.
I can't think of much that we're not working on right now. Mine would obviously be toward the investigative side, and we're proceeding.
Okay, so continue, and we'll have something on investigations for the next meeting. I will tell you, I have a piece of paper that I'll hand out in a little bit, but I had two things. One was that we should continue to have monthly meetings, and we should continue to have them on the same regular schedule that we've been having them, but that we consider, to the extent possible, moving the time back. If it's possible, as we get a little farther down the road, to have shorter meetings and begin them a little later. I think if we could start at 5 or even 5:15, it would be easier for the public. So that would be one recommendation that I would like to throw out there. And the second would be that we continue, and we've done some work on this. I think our website can benefit both from its ease of accessibility and the quantity of information that we post. And that kind of gets into some things. I know Julie has mentioned several times the possibility that, we might have a video of this or that, or some of those kinds of things. And I think those are, in my mind, sort of website material items. I think there's an opportunity for us. We heard a comment that, we ought to do more to notice our meetings and to seek public input. And I think that the website is probably our best format for doing that. So I think that any time and energy that we spend on that will be time well spent. And Ms. Meadows-Keefe has a comment.
For example, the Democrat did run a brief item on this meeting, and there was only one comment on the meeting, but the person wrote that, why are these meetings so early? Most people are still working at 4, and I didn't, but I wanted to answer on Facebook and say, hey, no, by the time we get to this portion, you'll probably be off work. But I have heard that comment, so.
Yeah, and I think we've tried to structure our meetings largely so that a lot of the procedural stuff, reports, and the routine month-to-month stuff gets done in that first part of the meeting. But again, I think that just it's as much perception as practice. I think to the extent that we could move back without running much later into the evening. I don't know, maybe going from 5:15 to 7:30 or something would be a little less meeting time, but something that I think we ought to consider for next year as a change. So nobody else has any comments? Ms. Phillips.
Is this time to address the chief judge issue appointment?
I think that's probably a charter amendment issue, so let's save that for something that we're going to have to, because I don't think there's anything that Jerry and I've talked about that a good bit, and I don't think there's anything that we can do about the seventh member in terms of our policies and practices and bylaws. There just doesn't seem to be much of anything there.
I have a question about the website.
Ms.
Do
McNeil.
we maintain that, or does the city?
The city maintains the website. If you recall, we had some discussion early on about would it be effective, would it speak more to our independence to have our own website? The issue with that was discussed at the time is, number one, there's a cost note affiliated with website design and maintenance. And number two, it's the ease of finding it. There's a challenge associated with divorcing this board's website from the city's. If people type in City of Tallahassee Ethics Board, they're going to get to our website because I've tested that. There's, what do they call it, search engine optimization issues, Google, all of that stuff. So I have looked at that issue, and I will say that when I have asked city staff to alter the website in any way, they've always been extraordinarily responsive, and myself, I have suggestions, including taking all of our videos of our meetings and putting them on the Ethics Board website in like a mini YouTube channel, so if someone was having trouble sleeping one night, they could actually watch every meeting we've had. So just stuff like that to make information more accessible to people.
One of the nice things I've noticed is when you pull, for instance, our agenda and all the documents, you can pull any other city organization getting together right at the same site, and that's much easier. Excuse me, I'm choking to death. I beg your pardon. But I think that that's a good thing.
Yeah, I was going to make much the same comment. I like the fact that if somebody wants to go looking for a city commission agenda, they're liable to see our agenda too at the same time. And so I think it actually may get us more views by being interwoven with some of the, in terms of the formatting. I don't know that it would be a bad thing, and there might be something that we could do through one of the universities where we could get some kind of, professional review. So that might be something that we might look at doing, whether it would be free or even if it cost us a little bit of money. Somebody could come in and say, these are the kinds of things, I don't know what you do, I don't care what you do, but these are the kinds of things that people like to see, that people are used to seeing, that people who aren't dinosaurs, no offense to anyone on this board, expect to see in 2016.
Their user experience with using the website, I think is what they call it. So somebody looks at it and goes, this is the user experience that's expected in 2016, and your website looks like it's from 1999, and here's some tips to enhance it.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So that, I think we can have something specific drafted for next week. And is there anything else in terms of board practices, policies, bylaws?
Mr. Chair?
Ms. Davis.
I had a couple of comments.
Yes, please.
I hope this fits. Tell me if it doesn't fit. But I know one of one of the folks that made public comment mentioned that his wife wondered if we were doing anything significant or if we had done anything significant. And I think with a lot of groups like this, I'm not speaking at all against that. I know a lot of people have different views for different bodies, but sometimes if the public knew better what we were doing, and I just wondered, would it ever be appropriate for some type of publication to be sent out from this body to the city with just bullet points of what we have accomplished in a matter of a year? In other words, to me, it's impressive as to the training that's done, the annual memorandum that was sent out recently, and the points that are addressed on that memorandum to remind city employees of their ethical duties. That's helpful for me as a citizen to know. I wish that we could all know that Washington was doing that with every agency and every bureau in Congress and every member of Congress and every staff member the same with our state, House, and Senate. The reminders, I need to be reminded sometimes, as I've said before, of some of my moral, ethical, spiritual duties: father, husband, brother. One time my brother told me, he said, "You could do a better job washing your bathtub," when I was in college. And he was exactly right. And I started taking better care of my bathtub. I appreciated him saying that. But a bullet point presentation that we are doing these things, the fact that Julie fields these calls, and sometimes it's not within our jurisdiction, but she says, "Mr. So-and-so, you can go here. And Mrs. So-and-so, you can go here to the city and here to the state attorney." That's a public service that's being provided to me that's very important and is serving a good purpose for the city of Tallahassee. There are good things being done. I'm sure we can do a whole lot more, and I appreciate every public comment that was made today. But I could see a bullet point presentation. Here's some things we've accomplished. Boom, boom, boom. Not something heavy or detailed, just some of those good bullet points. And then the other point is, and I've talked to Julie about this, but I'm still trying to struggle how we implement our enforcement of potential ethical violations based upon our ethics, City of Tallahassee ethics bylaws versus Chapter 112, for example. And for example, Chapter 112, and I noticed that the City of Jacksonville has a similar provision, the City of Jacksonville Ethics Board, Ethics Code, misuse of public position section. The definition of what it means to misuse your public position to try to secure a special privilege, benefit, or exemption for yourself or others. And I'm still trying to understand why we would not be trying to add that type of provision, which seems to me to kind of be fundamental to ethics duties and ethical reminders. Why we would not have that as part of a proposal to be added to the City of Tallahassee ethics codes.
Okay, well, that leads me right into what I was hoping we would do is the second piece, which I think is going to be the meatier piece. And I pointed out on page 2 of this annual reminder, you can look at the city personnel and procedure, city personnel policy and procedures manual. The first item there is conflict of interest, which is along those lines. And so the city does have policies on that. They don't relate to our jurisdiction. So let's go specifically then to what things board members want us to have as formal to consider for the next meeting, formal items that would be our recommendations to the city commission. And again, if you know whether it is a change in city policy, a change in a city ordinance, or a change in the charter, label it that way. If you don't, then just say this is a recommendation that I think we ought to make to the city commission, and we'll figure out what category it fits in. So comments on what we would want to recommend, if anything, to the city commission. And I think you're well, and what Mr. Davis, are you talking broadly about all of Chapter 112, or are you talking about specific?
Well, I'm still trying to understand, and maybe I'm a little slow here, but I'm still trying to understand, as a City of Tallahassee Ethics Board, and I think Julie said that a City of Tallahassee employee is subject to the provisions of Chapter 112?
They are.
So if someone is allegedly violating, for example, this misuse of public position category in Chapter 112, we could then have a probable cause hearing. If we find probable cause, we could move forward with a hearing in regard to that ethics charge.
If misuse of public position was in the city ethics ordinance, yes.
Mm-hmm. But what I'm trying to understand is, can we go forward like that based upon a violation of Chapter 112?
Those issues would go to the State Commission on Ethics.
Okay, now that's what I thought. So why would we not have similar provisions in the City of Tallahassee Ethics Code? Because some of these in Chapter 112 seem to me to be so fundamental as to ethics violations and ethical duties. why would we not strive to have them within the Tallahassee Ethics Code provisions?
Well, and we certainly could, and that's a recommendation we can make. One of the things I think to consider, now, of course, there is a difference between us and the state commission in terms of the ability to self-initiate, but there's always the issue of overlapping jurisdictions. And some jurisdictions have said, whatever violations of the state statute you commit go to the state board, and then we're going to have additional things. So maybe the state says, you know, you can't take a gift more than $25, and any violation goes to them. And we're going to say you can't take a gift more than $10, so any gift between 10 and 25 goes to our local board, and above 25, so that there's no overlap. So one of the questions we're going to have to talk about, I think, is how much do we want to overlap? If someone files a complaint, and if we did overlap, if someone files a complaint with the state and a complaint with us, do we conduct joint hearings? What effect if we say there is a violation, they say there's not, or vice versa? What does that do? Does it violate, you know, kind of the idea of, you know, I go to court once and I'm done? There are those issues also to consider, I think. But certainly when you look at the materials that Julie gives, the report, the annual report from the State Commission on Ethics, their number one category was misuse of position. So those three words somewhere added to our jurisdiction would probably capture an awful lot of what people think maybe we might ought to be looking at.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you.
May I?
Mr. Friedman.
Yeah, I like one-stop shopping, and I think that the best one-stop shopping is the shopping closest to home. And there's several reasons for it. The first one is the fact we can self-initiate. Something may never make it to the state unless someone turns in a formal complaint. That's one. Second thing is someone to have a part of what is not allowed be state and part of what is not allowed be local is to subject yourself again to the thing bifurcating virtually immediately. And I don't think that serves anybody. It's not swift and it's not immediate. You want to take it all and have one place where you can deal with it all. For us to take something to a line and say, well, our line stops here. It's up to the state to pick it up. I don't think that cuts it. You either do the whole job, in my opinion, or don't start.
Well, but unless you amend the statute, if we have overlapping jurisdiction, someone complains to us and we say, it's just, this isn't misuse of position, then they can feel free to go a month later, 2 months later, 3 months later.
They can go to the state.
Well, it's not venue shopping. They're not shopping. They go to one, get the answer they don't like, and then they go to the other. It's beyond form shopping. It implies that you get to pick which of two forms is going to be the most favorable to you. This isn't shopping at all. This is, I have both of them available. So I get 2 bites at the same apple.
Well, that one phone call, and that doesn't happen. You call the state and say, did you render a decision on this? They said, yes, we did. And then we come back and say, well, we're not going to because they already have.
And
I mean, that's not a real problem.
But do you
it's
think
just a phone call?
But is the State Commission on Ethics going to do the same for us?
That's their problem, not ours. We cannot control what someone else does. I learned that early on.
Well, I
Federal versus state jurisdiction.
Right.
You go out and you start what you're doing. If someone else has an interest, believe me, they're going to let you know very quickly.
Okay. Other comments? In terms of the state ethics law, am I hearing that there is a desire to focus on misuse of position, or is it a broader, is there more or all of it that we think is, for instance, if someone is required to fill out a Form 1, an employee files a financial disclosure, a Form 1, or files a gift disclosure because they got a gift that's above a certain limit, but it's not from a relative. It's from their old college roommate who doesn't have anything to do with Florida, but it's still not from a relative, so it's not exempt, and they file a gift disclosure. Should we be looking at that kind of stuff? Or does that belong with the State Commission only?
Well, anytime you enforce, you always have the ability to decide what you will enforce. So that would be up to the board to decide not to pursue something like that if it was of administrative nature that the state handles. What we're looking for is things that will actually fit in with the rest of our ethics code to make sure that we don't wind up with bits and pieces that are outside our purview.
So so you're saying we would not,
You wouldn't have to.
we would not, oh, you would want us to have the ability?
Prosecutor always has the right to decide what to prosecute. Prosecutor limits, minimum limits. If you decide that that's not one of the things we handle as a group, then you don't handle it. If you take other parts of the code and decide you will handle them, then you do handle them.
So you're saying I want to be sure I'm clear.
What you
But
probably want to do
we
is
could
take
handle
all
any
provision.
complaint related to any provision of the state ethics law.
Yes. But it would be up to us to decide which ones we feel that we ought to be handling. You need to go through the whole thing probably and select what, there's two ways of doing it. One is to say that we would like the ability, and this is a charter, I would say, type thing, going back to the voters and saying we'd like the ability to enforce the state code in addition to whatever we have locally. Step two of that is to determine what areas we want to actually be handling. There's certain administrative aspects, like filing of forms, we probably don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole because, frankly, we don't have the ability to do that. It goes to the state, let the state handle it. So what we pretty much want to do is cherry pick those things that we think we ought to be dealing with, which are truly ethics violations, as opposed to administrative procedures that we have, we couldn't be bothered dealing with.
Okay.
In my opinion.
Well, I'm still confused.
How you chop that up, you either go and say you want to do the whole state code better than that. You pick out the parts you want and add them to our charter.
Okay. So
That's the only way.
we wouldn't have broad authority and say we don't feel like dealing with that particular part of our authority today. We don't think it's important enough.
I would suggest that the easiest way to do it would be to exclude it at the beginning.
Okay, so we would pick specific elements out of the state ethics code.
Those things we think are important and are basic to ethics.
And
yes.
the one Mr. Davis raised, of course,
Yeah,
is the
that's one of them.
misuse of position. There's nepotism, there's gifts, the gift ban, there's a wide variety of broad topics. I think does it have it, do you have the summary handy? I had it marked in here, but now I'm sure I won't be able to find it.
What document are you talking about?
Their annual report.
Oh,
That's tab C.
it's right here.
I think they have a summary by topic. Yeah, it's page 9 under tab C. So misuse of position was their number one thing. Conflicting employment and contractual relationship was number 2. Willful failure to file a financial disclosure. Form 1, which is employees. Form 6 would be public officials. The willful disclosure to file financial disclosure would be the third biggest category, and then the fourth would be pretty much a tie between voting conflicts and disclosure or use of information that you gained as part of your employment that you ought not to be, I find out that the city's going to buy a certain piece of property, so I go tell one of my buddies, hey, if you want to make some money, you want to buy some of this property.
Yeah.
So that's what you're saying, is cherry picking those kind of topics.
Pick the ones that are really ethics violations and leave the stuff like failure to, file a 6 or a 1 out, because that's really not something that they don't file it with us, therefore we have no business inquiring about it.
Okay.
Is that a good way of putting it?
Sure. Well, Mr. Davis pointed out misuse of positions. Let's just take a look at, I'm thinking about having, something that we can look at the next meeting. Is there anything else there on page 9?
Well, I think Jacksonville states misuse of position very well, and there's,
I had that. That's the one I was looking at.
Yeah, this is the Yeah, the Jacksonville,
It's right at the top.
Jacksonville misuse of position, this is under tab 1. Let me make some notes.
You're right. Okay.
Is there another topic? I mean, that one by itself, in terms of the state board, is worth 40%? Over a third of the total. I'm trying to do some quick math here, but it's hard to add up a bar chart real quickly. But probably a third of all the complaints involve that one thing. Mr. Davis.
Chair, just another couple of comments, and it's mainly to make sure I'm understanding everything better. But, for example, it was noted earlier that the City of Tallahassee Ethics Board can self-initiate an investigation. But
Within the jurisdiction of the ordinance, yes.
But that the State Ethics Commission cannot.
That's correct.
So if we can, they can't. And we don't have a similar provision like this such that it would allow us to self-initiate an investigation. Are we limiting ourselves?
Well, and that's the issue. That's been a long-standing complaint with the State Commission on Ethics, is that because with the exception of a limited area related to financial disclosure forms, they cannot self-initiate investigations. The legislature's not been willing to give them that authority. So someone has to file a complaint. We've got a legal opinion that we could, on our own, initiate an investigation. It's kind of filing a complaint to ourselves. It's in that nature. So even if we had overlapping jurisdiction, if nobody was willing to complain and we thought it was worth running with, then we could do it, and which the state board could not.
If we had that provision.
If we had the Jacksonville misuse of position.
There's also one in Palm Beach.
Please.
Mr. Chair, just one other comment. I just wonder if we could learn from the City of Jacksonville why they chose some of those provisions in their ethics code provisions, even though there's some overlapping with the State Ethics Commission or Chapter 112.
They go ahead and,
Please.
I think in some of these local provisions, from my having reviewed them, they go into a little more detail in defining what misuse of position is. In the State Ethics Code 112, you have misuse of position, and it's not always that well defined for folks. So what Jacksonville and Palm Beach has done, and Palm Beach has also done a pretty detailed one, it actually describes what misuse of position looks like. So you can know it when you see it. So I think that's the virtue in the Palm Beach and in the Jacksonville provisions, is that they go ahead and enunciate what that is.
That's good, yeah.
And for the record, we're looking at, in Palm Beach, they have section 2-443, it's prohibited conduct. And then in the city of Jacksonville, theirs is section 602.401, misuse of position information, et cetera. And I think in 112, we have that requirement of corrupt intent.
Right.
And then in the Jacksonville provision, they don't use that. They use intentionally. So it doesn't have to be corrupt. It just has to be intentional. So they make it stricter.
Yeah. And that would appear to fit in with, weren't there some laws that were just changed that at the state level that changed that definition also, and some of this stuff?
It's been a couple of years, but yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is we're going to come back with something for the next meeting. We'll use the Jacksonville and Palm Beach ordinances as a model and come back with something using the Jacksonville model, it would be a little broader than misuse of position because it's also misuse of information. So it would cover, which is kind of misuse of position too. I use my position to get information to give to my buddy to make money. Mr. Currington.
Mr. Chair, I don't want to speak out of school here, but I would just make an observation in light of some of the public comments we've had today. The City of Jacksonville ordinance, for example, enumerates a lot of the things that are in Chapter 112.313, but not all of them. If you look at the Seminole County or the Tampa ones, they just adopt Chapter 112, Part 3 in toto. And I think from the comments of the public here, the more we adopt, the more teeth will be perceived. The public perceives us. If we pick and choose, if we cherry pick and only pick half of them, you're going to have critics saying, well, why didn't you pick the other half? I mean, to me, from a public perspective, incorporating all of Part 3 of Chapter 112 is maybe the safest thing and the most proactive thing to do. Now, when you do that, I've heard conversation here about concurrent jurisdiction, and I think I briefly addressed that in one of my earlier opinions. There are legal principles like comity and collateral estoppel and res judicata, so that if both jurisdictions were to move forward, comity would say, okay, one, that C-O-M-I-T-Y would say, we'll defer to the state, or the state will defer to us, or whatever, just like the state and federal courts have comity. And so one would hold back and let the other one resolve it or whatever. And then if that happens, then you will confront whether or not there was collateral estoppel or res judicata, and one of those doctrines apply. So, but I think it will be almost inherent that there will be conflicts between the two jurisdictions in which you could come to different results, just like you can between state and federal court.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think what I'm hearing then is two alternatives. One would be adopting all of Section 313,
Right.
and the other would be modeling the Jacksonville Palm Beach misuse of position information provisions, which would not be everything, but it is probably the catch-all language. For instance, I would argue that nepotism is misuse of position. And, do you need a separate provision on nepotism? In my view, nepotism is the consummate misuse of position. Comments? Ms. Phillips, I see the
nod. I agree. And I was a bit uncomfortable with the cherry picking because you could actually, and I didn't understand your comment at first about cherry picking. I thought we would just adopt 112 and then you would pick whichever ones. But a future board, I would argue, would pick the easy ones to deal with. And I wouldn't want that to occur. So I think you addressed that issue.
If I may, I mean, I said initially to adopt the whole thing, and when it ran into a little bit of questioning, I said, well, we could cherry pick. Obviously, it's better to go as broad as you can.
Right.
I think.
So, Ms. Phelps?
And I do believe misuse of information or position is key. I know with my experience with the state, that was, the misuse of position, whether it be a staffer or a legislator or a lobbyist or whatever, that was one of the key areas in which there were ethics violations. So.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, when you look at these other broad categories, I'm going back to page 9 of the annual report from the State Commission, doing business with your own agency looks to me like it could fall under misuse of position. Conflicting employments, conflicting contractual relationships, looks like it could be misuse of position. Soliciting gifts looks like it could be misuse of position.
Can I butt in for a second and tell you what the problem is with what you're saying? The problem with what you're saying is the fact that generally, if you're going to charge someone with something, you generally try, it's a matter of prosecution, to have as many different things that you are charging. The nice thing about what the state does is they give a different definition, which is specific for each one of these violations. And so what you could have is a situation where someone is charged with violating 112, 313, 3, 2, and then go over to another page, and you've got certain other things that also fit within the definitions. That way, that gives you the ability necessary when we're talking attorneys to negotiate sometimes a peaceable resolution to the problem, as opposed to having just one thing that you call what it is, and you hope that the definition you come up with, which, unlike these, has not been to court enough times to truly know what the definition means. You know, I mean, a lot of times clear words don't necessarily mean what they read. If you want the thing to be usable, using the state definitions gives you the clarity that most of them, having been decided again and again and again, gives you.
Yep.
And that's the benefit, I think.
Okay. Yeah, no. Okay, so we've got those couple of things. Is there anything else in terms of recommendations to the City Commission?
Yeah.
Mr. Friedman.
Okay. I think that getting back to having an addendum, I guess, to the charter going before the voters, we have some issues that we specifically do need to deal with. One of them, obviously, is what happens upon the reappointment if, you know, the term ends. Let me see. I had another thing written down here. Let me see. Oh, yeah. I don't know whether this is going back to anybody or not, but it's going back in an informal fashion. I don't think that the election refund program has had enough time to really determine how effective it's going to be. And I'm concerned that we're going to have one of the city commissioners come back and say, well, we did it one election cycle, it hadn't worked, or whatever. There hadn't been enough response. I think we should definitely go out loud and clear saying it has just started and that it will need some more time before we really know how effective it can be. We're learning how to advertise it. We're learning how to do, you know, a number of things with it. We didn't even have it open the full period that it could have been open. And I think it's very, very important that be our stance on this thing, that we think it ought to go a while longer. I don't know whether it'll work or not, but I do know it deserves a fair chance.
Okay. Next.
And pie in the sky. I used to do a financial disclosure as a procurement officer in the federal government. It required me to do a complete listing of my assets in addition to my income each year, and it was specific. I had to tell them everything I owned. It would be delightful if somehow we could have our elected officials, upon being elected, provide a full breakdown of their assets.
That's a form.
And upon
That's Form 6 under Chapter 12.
It's not complete. It isn't.
Okay.
Is that, well,
They do Form 1.
yes.
They don't, and county commissioners do Form 6.
How complete is Form 6?
Form 6
Everything?
It's complete.
So you can tell how much wealth someone has amassed between their first election and their last?
It's their net worth, is it?
A Form 6 requires you to list individual assets. So if I have a brokerage account, I have to list the individual items in that brokerage account, who they relate to and how much money each of them is worth.
I stand corrected. I didn't realize the 6 was that much more specific, having never seen
For,
one.
Form 1 is not at all, but Form 6 is very specific.
But
Okay.
commissioners only file Form 1.
Commissioners only file Form 1?
Our city commissioners only file Form 1. County commissioners, constitutional officers file Form 6. But our city commissioners file the same form that you do, Mr. Friedman, and all the
Then
other
I
board
would like
members.
to see our city commissioners file the equivalent of a Form 6.
Okay. Okay.
Nobody should get rich in public office.
Okay. Next.
Oh. Let's see.
We're going to jam as much as we can in these last few minutes.
That's it.
Okay. Anybody else?
I just had a question about the ethics board shall, and one of the items listed was mismanagement. I don't quite understand that term mismanagement. Are we talking about human resources mismanagement? I mean, I'm not sure that term, I'm not sure what it means, but it may be just that I'm ignorant as to what it means and somebody else understands it. But if it's a word that's not getting us anywhere, then there's no point. We either need to use a different term or address it.
I would piggyback on that I think that term is profoundly confusing, and I think the distinction between the hotline, the fraud and ethics hotline, and all the calls that come into there, and then what the ethics board does and the jurisdiction of the board, I think is profoundly confusing.
Right.
Clearly, the hotline has very, very broad jurisdiction to take calls and then refer things on, but it doesn't mean that all of those things become ethics complaint or within the jurisdiction of this board. And I think those terms need to, I agree with you, I think the terms need to be better defined, and the distinction between the hotline and the board needs to be clear. So someone who calls Julie, am I speaking to Julie, the hotline referral person, or Julie, the ethics officer employee of the ethics board? And they may not know, and she may not know until deep into a conversation. And Julie can add to that.
Really quickly, that by mismanagement, when I think of that, if I get a call and it's from an employee on another employee, and there's something going on in that work unit, right, where a boss isn't supervising correctly, or there's some fraud or theft going on, to me, that's a mismanagement question. And I know when departments are audited, there are management practices that may be identified and recommended for change. Those wouldn't necessarily be ours, but they may come to us and they would get referred to, say, the auditor or human resources or the city manager. Hey, there's been this concern expressed about how this is being mismanaged. So when I hear that, and when a call comes or an issue comes, that's how I think of it.
And I can certainly appreciate, Mr. Chair, if it's okay, your view of it, but fraud is listed. So I just think maybe we keep the word mismanagement, but I think we really need to look at that and better define what it is.
If somebody's supposed to be doing an annual
Performance
evaluation of all of their employees, and they only do it every 14 months instead opposed to every 12 months, is that mismanagement? I don't know.
Can we fix that if they are?
And I don't know that ought to be us as a board. Maybe it's a call that goes into the hotline and says some city manager's not following city personnel actions, whatever. Okay, any other comments? Because we are right on the witching hour here.
Okay, I have a passion that I'm going to mention, and it's the word training, mandatory training. And I'm going to say what I always say, and I've said for 25 years. You train the military, you train horses, and you train dogs and cats. You educate people. You do not train them.
It's charter language.
It's charter language, but it's also in our bylaws, and I'm telling you, that word drives me nuts.
I'll get it.
Okay.
I
Okay,
can
so
replace that.
That's something, that's a recommendation for both us and the city commission. The time having pretty much expired, what I'm going to do, I have 2 pages of notes, and I'm going to ask Julie if she will, I've got 25 copies. I'm going to ask Julie if she'll give them to the board members, and then she can have whatever extras to give to anybody who wants them. I'm sure they burn just as well as any other paper. I kind of broke it down, some of the things we're talking about here. I did not get into any particular specifics. The one thing it did seem to me, we might kill multiple birds with one stone with a charter amendment that just says anytime there's a vacancy on the board that exists for more than X number of days, the board can fill it until the normal appointing authority fills it. that one sentence would cover both our seventh, our judicial appointment, which we would just fill. It would cover situations where we have an appointing authority that doesn't act timely, a situation where somebody had to resign or move or for whatever other reason could not participate. We would just deal with it without getting too caught up in all the detail of all the reasons that people might not serve. But with that said, what we will do is we will come back next month with as much of this as possible.
Continue more discussion.
The things that we've gotten either as recommendations from board members, or we'll take what we got from public comment that we can craft. I'll work with Julie, anything we can craft into something that looks like a brief recommendation to the City Commission or a recommendation to the 2017 Ethics Board. We'll have for you anything that we can take an action on next month, we will take action. Anything that any of this discussion we need to continue, since we have simply run out of time today, we will continue next month, so this is not over. Please keep wearing your thinking caps. Board, anything that anybody wants to raise to add to an agenda for a future meeting? Seeing none. Any public comment on non-agenda items? Seeing none. Our next meeting is, excuse me?
We're going to do photos of the board at the next meeting, so hopefully everyone can be, we have a group photo. We've taken one last year, we're going to take one this year. Because we have a board member leaving.
Can you be replaced?
Sure, we can talk about that at the next meeting, too.
Our next meeting is Tuesday, December 20th, 2016, from 4 to 7 p.m. here in the City Commission chamber, and with that, we are adjourned.